I chose my cheating mom over my dad, and it cost me everything. Never thought one decision could echo this loudly for this long. When I was 17, my parents' marriage imploded in a way that felt sudden but, looking back, was probably years in the making. My mom sat me down at the kitchen table one afternoon, hands wrapped around a mug she didn't drink from, and told me my dad had emotionally abandoned her. She said she'd found comfort elsewhere. She didn't use the word cheating. She said surviving. Why dad wasn't there to defend himself. He'd already moved into a small apartment across town to give everyone space. That silence mattered more than I realized. The time I chose my mom. It felt logical. I lived with her. She cried in front of me. She told me details I now know a parent should never tell their child. She said my dad was cold, distant, judgmental. She said if I loved her, I'd understand why she did what she did. I stopped answering my dad's calls. I ignored his texts. When he showed up to my high school graduation and waved, I pretended not to see him. People congratulated me. Cameras flashed, and I felt righteous, like I was standing on the right side of a moral line. That feeling didn't last. The divorce finalized the summer before I left for college. My mom told everyone who would listen that my dad had abandoned the family. I repeated it. At family gatherings, I corrected aunts and uncles when they asked how my dad was doing. He chose his career over us, I'd say, even though I didn't really know if that was true. The first crack came during my freshman year. I was home for winter break, and my mom introduced me to Mark, her friend. I recognized him immediately. He was the man whose name had popped up on her phone during dinner back when my parents were still married. The man she'd laughed off as just a coworker. Mark stayed over that night. I lay awake in my childhood bedroom listening to them move around the house like they'd already claimed it together. It felt wrong, but I pushed the feeling down. I told myself adults were complicated. Love was messy. My mom deserved happiness. Then the story started to change. One night, after too much wine, my mom admitted she and Mark had been seeing each other longer than I realized. When I asked how long, she waved her hand. Before your dad moved out. But it doesn't matter. He was checked out anyway. Something twisted in my stomach. Over the next few months, I noticed how often my mom lied, small things at first. Who paid for what? Why bills were late? Why she needed to borrow money from me, a broke college student working part-time. She framed everything as temporary, as bad luck, as someone else's fault. BY sophomore year, Mark had moved in full-time. That's when my mom changed. She became sharper, meaner, constantly anxious. She criticized my weight, my major, my friends. She borrowed more money and never paid it back. When I pushed back, she reminded me of everything she'd sacrificed for me and how my dad hadn't sacrificed anything. I started having panic attacks. Around that time, my dad emailed me. Not a guilt trip, not anger. Just a long message telling me he was proud of me for getting into grad school early, that he'd kept every drawing I'd made him as a kid, and that he was there if I ever wanted to talk. I didn't reply, but I reread it over and over. The real cliff fell the year I graduated. I needed a cosigner for my first apartment. My mom promised she'd help. At the last minute, she bailed, said her credit was being weird. Mark, she said, couldn't help either. I called my dad. He didn't hesitate. We met for coffee. It was the first time we'd been alone together in almost 5 years. He looked older, tired. But when he smiled at me, it was like no time had passed. He signed the papers. No lectures. No conditions. As we were leaving, I asked him, finally, why he'd left so quietly all those years ago. He paused, then said, because every time I tried to explain, your mom told me if I did, she'd make sure you never spoke to me again. My chest went hollow. He told me the full story then. About finding messages. About suggesting counseling. About my mom refusing and telling him she was already in love with someone else. About how he stayed silent because he thought eventually I'd come back on my own. I went home and cried until I was sick. When I confronted my mom, she exploded. She said my dad had manipulated me. She accused me of betrayal. She told me if I chose him now, I was choosing a man who never wanted to be a father. Something inside me snapped. I moved out 2 weeks later. That should have been the end of it, but consequences don't work like that. I had burned bridges I couldn't rebuild overnight. I'd lost years with my dad, birthdays, holidays, normal conversations. My relationship with my mom was fractured beyond repair. Extended family didn't know who to trust. Some stopped talking to me altogether, and the patterns I learned from my mom followed me that I stayed too long in bad relationships. I excused lies. I confused loyalty with self-destruction. I chose sides instead of truth. The worst moment came last year, and my dad had a heart scare. Nothing fatal, but serious enough that the words, "We caught it just in time," were said. I sat in a hospital chair thinking about how close I came to never fixing anything. He squeezed my hand and said, "I'm just glad we have now." That's when I realized how much of my life I'd wasted defending a lie, because it felt safer than admitting I was wrong. I didn't just side with my cheating mother. I sided with a version of reality that let me avoid pain in the short term and paid for it in the long run that I'm rebuilding. Slowly. With therapy. With uncomfortable truths. With apologies that can't undo the past but might soften it. Like and subscribe for more.